to give us tawfiq, and we thank him at the same time for allowing us to have this lecture here today, because it's through his grace we have a Shaykh who is visiting us, who has agreed to deliver this lecture here at Masjid Tayba here tonight. The Shaykh has travelled around the world delivering this topic, around the UK as well when he's been visiting. And the reason for that is because the Shaykh has got an extensive research that he has done on this topic, as you can probably see in front of him. And this research was presented to different ulama in Saudi Arabia, outside of Saudi Arabia. One of them is Shaykh Abdullah ibn Abdul Muhsin al-Turki, one of the major scholars of the Ummah today. And he wrote a foreword approving of the book, praising the book and saying that the book is very highly beneficial. Also, the Grand Mufti of Mauritania has been over the book and praised it likewise. So we thank Allah again, and we thank the Shaykh for agreeing to come to deliver this very important topic. The topic is about entering into protection with the non-Muslims. The theme of the lecture today, which will be translated, is the fiqh aspect of how we understand living alongside non-Muslims, especially living in the UK here. تفضل Shaykh.
الحمد لله رب العالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، فإني أحمد الله سبحانه وتعالى أن جمعني بكم في هذه الليلة لنتكلم عن موضوع مهم يحتاج إليه كل مسلم يعيش في هذه البلاد، وهو كما قرأتم فقه الدخول في أمان غير المسلمين.
The Shaykh began by praising Allah and saying that we worship none except Him and He has no partner. And he began by sending peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And then he said to proceed, I thank Allah that Allah has gathered us here on this night to talk about this topic, which is a very important topic, which is concerning to every single Muslim. It concerns every single Muslim living in this country. And he reiterated the title of the topic will be the fiqh, the understanding, the religious practical codes of entering into protection and cooperation with non-Muslims in this country.
وأهمية هذا الموضوع يظهر من وجوه. الأول أن المسلم ينبغي عليه أن يعلم أحكام الله حتى يلتزم بها ولا يتعداها، وذلك يلزم بقدر حاجة الإنسان إليه. فالإنسان إذا كان عنده مال فيجب عليه أن يتعلم أحكام الزكاة، وإذا أراد أن يحج فيجب عليه أن يتعلم أحكام الحج، بخلاف من ليس عنده مال لا يحتاج أن يعرف تفاصيل أحكام الزكاة، ومن ليس عنده قدرة على الحج لا يحتاج أن يعرف التفاصيل. فكذلك المسلم الذي يعيش بين غير المسلمين ويعيش في هذه البلاد الواجب عليه أن يعرف القدر الضروري الذي يتعلق به من أحكام الشريعة. هذا الوجه الأول في أهمية هذا الموضوع.
The Shaykh said that this topic is extremely important from various different angles and various different viewpoints. And he began by explaining the first one. He said that the Muslim, he needs to know the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that he can follow the religion. He needs to know the rulings concerning the religion of Allah so that he can follow them and not transgress them. And every single one of us have an interaction that we need to have knowledge of when it comes to the religion of Allah and understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And the Shaykh said that is according to the need. So if you've got some wealth, then you need to study and ask about the rulings concerning zakat. If a person is going for Hajj, he needs to learn the ahkam concerning Hajj. Unlike the person who has no wealth or he is not planning on going to Hajj, then it's not necessary for that person to understand and study those masail and the fiqh aspects of those things. So the Shaykh is saying here, Muslims are living amongst non-Muslims in this country. It becomes now then wajib upon every single one of us to know what we need, what the religion teaches us on how to live alongside those non-Muslims.
ومما يظهر أهمية هذا الموضوع أن الإنسان المسلم يتعبد الله سبحانه وتعالى ويتقرب إليه بالالتزام بأحكامه في هذه المسائل. يعني أن مجال التعبد والطاعة لله ليس فقط في العبادات المحضة، فإن التعامل مع المسلمين وغير المسلمين كل ذلك داخل فيما يجب على المسلم أن يراقب الله عز وجل فيه ويتقيه ويبتغي في ذلك مرضاته سبحانه وتعالى.
The Shaykh said the second importance, or the second reason why this topic is important is because every single one of us are to worship Allah, and it is a command for every single one of us to worship Him and get closer to Him. And the way we can worship Allah and get closer to Him is to know the ahkam and the masail and what the religion teaches us. And what this means, as the Shaykh is saying, is that worship is not just connected to the acts of worship that we are accustomed to know, like salah, etc. That is not just what worship is. The Shaykh is saying here, part of worship is to know the transactions that we have with fellow Muslims, the interactions and how we live alongside fellow Muslims and non-Muslims. Because the Muslim who wants to worship Allah and gets closer to Him, he realizes that Allah is watching over him, and he then acts based on that.
ثم الوجه الثالث في أهمية هذا الموضوع أن يعرف المسلم محاسن هذا الدين وجميل أخلاقه، فإن هذا باب عظيم من أبواب تثبيت الإيمان أولا، لأن الإنسان كلما عرف بمحاسن هذا الدين وجمال أحكامه كلما ازداد في الاعتزاز به والتمسك به. وكذلك أيضا معرفة محاسن هذا الدين باب من أبواب الدعوة إلى الله عز وجل. فالإنسان عندما يكون على بينة من هذه الأحكام يعرف كيف يجيب على الشبهات التي تثار ضد الإسلام والمسلمين.
So the Shaykh said the third reason why this topic is very important is because this topic actually teaches us the goodness of this religion, the beauty of this religion, the akhlaq and the manners that you can find within this religion. And when a person studies it, he will find that his iman becomes firm, and he could even find his iman increase, because when he understands the goodness of this religion and the beauty of this religion, he will have honor in being a Muslim and the goodness that Islam is teaching him to have. And the Shaykh said that is a point, but there's also another point in understanding the goodness and the beauty of this religion, because then when a person acts upon that, it will be then da'wah to Allah and a way of propagating the goodness that this religion is telling us to have. So the Shaykh is saying also from that, a person knowing the ahkam and what this religion is telling us to understand, we will also then be equipped in having an answer against those people who try and level misconceptions and doubts about what this religion teaches us.
ونحن سنذكر إن شاء الله تعالى نماذج من الأحاديث في هذا الباب ليعرف الإنسان هذه الأخلاق العالية التي جاء بها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وألزم أتباعه بها قبل 1400 سنة، عندما كانت البشرية في جاهلية جهلاء وضلالة عمياء، فجاءت هذه الأخلاق السامية وهذه الأصول للتعامل بين البشر على أساس الوفاء بالعهود والمواثيق، وعلى أساس حفظ وصيانة التعامل الأخلاقي. هذا شيء الحقيقة يقف الإنسان مذهولا أمام جماله وعظمته وجلاله.
So the Shaykh saying in this lecture we're going to give examples of how Islam teaches us to have these lofty akhlaq, and we're going to look at some examples of how the Prophet ﷺ instilled this in us as being part of this religion more than 1400 years ago, when mankind was in a state of darkness and jahiliyyah, and the Shaykh called it a blind misguidance that mankind was generally in. But the Prophet ﷺ came with lofty akhlaq, and he came and he set it down and making it as a foundation for this religion, and then it became a foundation for mankind as a whole, and it became part of our covenants that we have with one another. And the Shaykh then also says that within these examples that the Shaykh is giving, also we find that there is a protection for society as well, that people have certain boundaries and certain ways that they like to interact with one another. All of that is based upon what the Prophet ﷺ came with more than 1400 years ago.
وتصوروا يا أخواني أن هذه المسألة جزء من أجزاء أحكام الشريعة، يعني حكم من أحكام الشريعة، ومع ذلك فيها آيات من كتاب الله وأحاديث عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وآثار عن الصحابة وكلام كثير لأئمة الإسلام من الفقهاء، حتى أنها يعني جمعت فصارت في كتاب. نحن لا نتكلم ولا نستطيع أن نتكلم عن كل ما في هذا الكتاب، لكن نضرب أمثلة فقط. فانظروا يا إخواني أن هذا الحكم وهو حكم واحد كيف فيه هذه السعة في الفقه الإسلامي، هذا كله يدل على عظمة هذا الدين.
So the Shaykh is saying here, just for you to think about and to comprehend and to think and ponder on, is the example of just one ruling, one mas'ala, one issue in ahkam and fiqh, that we have so many ayat which talk about this just one issue. We have hadith, we have statements from the companions, we have plenty of statements and sources from the scholars of the ummah. And the Shaykh said he has gathered it all and it has become a book. And the book is very extensive and is very comprehensive, to the extent that the Shaykh will not be able to cover all of the topics in the book, because that would need a great deal of time. But the Shaykh has said that he's going to give some examples, all of this, so that we can see for ourselves that just one ruling in Islam is so comprehensive and it is so lofty in its akhlaq, it gives honor to this religion.
الأمان في اللغة العربية عدم توقع المكروه في الزمن الآتي، يعني الإنسان إذا كان في حالة سكينة وطمأنينة فيقال أنه في أمان. ففي الفقه الإسلامي أخذ هذا اللفظ الجميل الذي يدل على سكينة النفس وطمأنينتها للدلالة على معنى فقهي، يعني حكم من أحكام الفقه. فقالوا عقد الأمان، عقد الأمان، كما أن هناك عقود في الشريعة مثل عقد البيع والشراء والنكاح، فهناك شيء اسمه عقد الأمان.
The Shaykh began entering into the topic by talking about what is protection, what is peace, what is security. And he said linguistically it means anything which is not going to disrupt, or something that is not, the society is not going to dislike and disrupt the way that people are living with one another. And he gives an example. So if we are living in a time of ease and tranquility and comfort, that would then be aman, and that would be protection and security, because everybody is comfortable. That's linguistically. But also he said, the Shaykh said that the ulama have also looked at it in a fiqhi aspect, in a more technical aspect. And they have taken the linguistic understanding of, being in tranquility and comfort and ease, but they've also applied that to covenants and agreements that we have with one another. Just like we have contracts when it comes to trading, etc. All of that is connected to us not violating one another and protecting one another.
وهذا الأمان يعني يطلق عليه عدة ألفاظ في اللغة العربية في الفقه: الجوار، العهد، الاستئمان، والشخص يسمى مستأمن ومستأمن. فهذه الألفاظ كلها دل على عقد الأمان، ولها أو له هذا العقد له صورتان. الصورة الأولى أن يدخل المسلم في أمان الكافر، والصورة الثانية أن يدخل الكافر في أمان المسلم.
So the Shaykh said that the meaning now us protecting one another and entering into a covenant with one another. The Shaykh is saying that in the Arabic language there are at least 4 different ways of us entering into that kind of contract with one another. So you could be bordering with someone, or you could have a contract with someone, or you could agree to protect someone, or the person himself enters into an area where he is protected. All of that are examples of how a person would enter into a contract. And the Shaykh said, in general, this has 2 examples, or 2 ways that they could be established. It could be that a Muslim gives protection to a non-Muslim, or a non-Muslim gives protection to a Muslim.
أما أن غير المسلمين يدخلون في أمان المسلمين فكان هذا هو الشائع والمعروف في التاريخ الإسلامي، الذين يسمون بأهل الذمة. فقد عاش اليهود والنصارى والمجوس وغيرهم من أهل الملل عاشوا في دولة المسلمين بأمان، أي عاشوا وهم مطمئنون على أديانهم وعلى دمائهم وأعراضهم، لم يعتدي عليهم أحد.
Sorry. The Shaykh said, as for non-Muslims being protected by Muslims, then this is well known in history, and there's even a terminology used for them in the books of the ulama. They are referred to as Ahl al-Dhimma, as in they are people who are protected and they enter into a Muslim state under that protection. And the Shaykh said there's many examples historically. Jews entered into that protection, Christians, fire worshippers, and they lived in a Muslim society under that protection. They were free to follow their religion, their blood and their selves, their bodies were protected, their honor and their wealth, etc. was protected. And this is the first example.
والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم شدد تشديدا بالغا في حفظ أمان من دخل في أمان المسلمين وحفظ دمائهم، وورد في ذلك أحاديث كثيرة، من ذلك ما في البخاري ومسلم عن عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: من قتل نفسا معاهدا لم يرح رائحة الجنة وإن ريحها لتوجد من مسيرة 40 سنة.
The Shaykh said there's an example from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he warned against transgressing the right of those non-Muslims who have entered under protection with that Muslim, that their honor is protected, their blood is protected, etc. And the Shaykh said that there are plenty of hadith, but he gives one example which has been collected by Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anh, that the Prophet ﷺ said that anybody who kills a person who has entered into that protection in a Muslim country, then he will not smell the fragrance of Jannah, even though this fragrance of Jannah can be smelled over 40 years of distance away.
ثم الصورة الثانية أن يدخل المسلم في أمان غير المسلمين، وهذه هي الصورة المتعلقة بنا نحن الذين نعيش في هذه البلاد ومثلنا من ملايين المسلمين الذين يعيشون في مختلف الدول الغربية.
Sorry, the Shaykh said that the second example is a Muslim living under a non-Muslim country. And the Shaykh said that this is our example of living in this country and millions of Muslims living under non-Muslim countries in the West.
أول رجل دخل في أمان غير المسلمين من هذه الأمة هو سيدنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، فإنه دخل في أمان عمه أبي طالب.
Sorry. The Shaykh said that the very first person who entered under a non-Muslim protection in a non-Muslim country, and he had protection from a non-Muslim, was the Prophet ﷺ himself, who got protection and security from his own uncle Abu Talib.
فكان هذا العرف، هذا النظام معروفا عند أهل مكة، فإذا كان هناك شخص له سلطة أو وجاهة أو مكانة في المجتمع يستطيع أن يقول أن هذا الشخص في حمايتي وحفظي فلا يعتدي عليه أحد. هكذا فعل أبو طالب، وكان سيدا في قومه له مكانة عالية مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال لهم: هو في جواري، أي في حفظي، في حمايتي، ولهذا لم يتجرؤوا عليه صلى الله عليه وسلم كما تجرؤوا عليه بعد وفاة أبي طالب، فإنهم بالغوا في إيذائه صلى الله عليه وسلم عندما مات عمه أبو طالب، فاضطر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى الخروج من مكة وذهب إلى الطائف.
So the Shaykh said that this is well known customarily in Mecca at that time, where if a person who's got authority or status and his word will be accepted, that if he offers protection for a person, then no one will transgress that. So Abu Talib had status, he had authority amongst the Quraysh, and he said that this is my nephew, he is Muhammad, and he is my jiwari, he is the one that I'm going to protect. And the Meccans knew that they weren't able to touch the Prophet ﷺ because they understood that if a person is protected by a person of authority and status, they cannot transgress that. And history also tells us that after Abu Talib passes away, they started to harm the Prophet ﷺ even more so in a way that they couldn't do before when Abu Talib was alive. That is because the protection has been removed. To the extent that the Prophet ﷺ, after Abu Talib passed away, he went to Ta'if to seek protection because he needed protection, because after Abu Talib passed away there was no more protection.
أهل الطائف لم يقبلوا دعوة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وردوه ردا قبيحا وسلطوا عليه سفهاءهم، فخرج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من الطائف قافلا راجعا إلى مكة، لكنه لم يستطع أن يدخل مكة لأنه ليس هناك من يستأمنه، من يدخل في جواره بعد وفاة أبي طالب. فأرسل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى أشراف قريش، إلى سادات قريش، فلان وفلان، أن أدخل في أمانكم، فلم يقبل إلا المطعم بن عدي. المطعم بن عدي أرسل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن أدخل في أماني، فدخل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مكة، وجاء المطعم بن عدي مع أولاده وذهب عند الكعبة وقال: يا معشر قريش، إني قد أجرت محمدا فلا يعتدي عليه أحد. فبقي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في جواره إلى أن هاجر إلى المدينة.
The Shaykh said that he went off to Ta'if seeking protection, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was not accepted. In actual fact, they were very harsh with him, the way they reacted to his call, and the foolish ran him out of Ta'if. So he came back to Makkah, and he was not able to enter back into Makkah because he left Makkah without protection. He can't come back in until he's got protection. So he sent a request to the authorities in Makkah, the people of Quraysh: is there anybody that will protect me now that I'm coming back into Makkah? Because Abu Talib has passed away. And nobody accepted except for a man called Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. And when Al-Mut'im ibn Adi said that, yes, I will protect you, Prophet ﷺ entered back into Makkah. Al-Mut'im with his sons took the Prophet ﷺ to the Kaaba, and they announced the protection over the Prophet ﷺ, and Al-Mut'im said that he is under my protection and nobody is allowed to transgress against that protection, and that remained the state of the Prophet ﷺ until he made Hijrah to Medina.
ثم من أوائل الذين دخلوا في جوار غير المسلمين هم المهاجرون إلى الحبشة، فإنه لما اشتد قريش على أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالإيذاء والتعذيب، وأشفق رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على أصحابه رغم حاجته إليهم في جواره ومحبته لهم، لكنه اختار ما هو أوفق بهم، فقال لهم: اذهبوا إلى الحبشة فإن بها ملكا لا يظلم عنده أحد. فكانت الهجرة الأولى والثانية، خرجوا ومجموعهم من الرجال والنساء قريب 100 خرجوا إلى الحبشة ودخلوا في جوار ملكها، فهذا أيضا من صور الدخول في أمان غير المسلمين.
The Shaykh said also from the very first of those who entered into protection from Muslims under a non-Muslim country were those who migrated from Mecca to Eastern Africa, Habasha, Ethiopia. that region. That is because the people in Mecca at that time were harming the people who had entered into Islam in its early stage. They were punishing them, they were insulting them. So the Prophet ﷺ, out of kindness to them, out of softness and wanting ease and goodness for them, even though he needed them present in Mecca himself, he needed them around, he loved to have the Muslims around, but because it was easier for them, because it was a way out of punishment and insults, he allowed for them to make hijrah to Habasha and Ethiopia. And he said that there is a king there that if you enter under his dominion and his governance, he doesn't oppress anyone. So he sent 2 hijras, not just one, and approximately around 100 men and women went and made hijrah from Mecca to Habasha. And this, the Shaykh is saying, is another example from the very earliest stage of Muslims living under a non-Muslim protection.
طبعا قصة الحبشة قصة جميلة فيها كثير من العبر، لكن الحقيقة ضيق الوقت لا نستطيع أن نتطرق إليها حتى لا نخرج عن الموضوع، فنتكلم عن ما ينعقد به هذا الأمان.
The Shaykh said, in actual fact, the hijrah to Habasha and Ethiopia at that time is actually very important, and there are many benefits that a person can gain from reflecting. But the Shaykh says, in order for us to stick to the topic, and because the time isn't with us, we are not able to digress and talk about those other benefits that a person can gain as a branch off from this main topic that we are going to discuss today. So the Shaykh is saying he's going to stick to the topic, inshallah.
الفقهاء بحثوا عن كيف ينعقد هذا الأمان ويصبح ملزما للمسلم، ما هي الوسائل. طبعا هنا أشير إلى مسألة مهمة جدا. الآن بعض الناس قد يقول لك إيش الفائدة في هذا الكلام ونحن نعيش في بلد تحكمنا فيه القوانين، والحكومة لا تنظر إلى دينك وعقيدتك، وإنما إيش؟ تنظر إلى أوراقك. إذا كانت أوراقك سليمة تحصل على الإقامة، تحصل على الجنسية، بغض النظر عن دينك. نقول نحن نتكلم عن موقف المسلم من جهة اعتقاده وتدينه، وليس ما يتعلق بالطرف الآخر. الطرف الآخر يحاسبك حسب القوانين، لكن أنت تبني علاقتك به ليس فقط على القوانين بل على مراقبة الله عز وجل في معاملته. نعم.
So the Shaykh now is going to go on to another part of the lecture in discussing how does protection, what is the process, how is protection established, what is the process of this. And the Shaykh is saying, some people might ask, what's the point of this? Because we are all here established in this country because the government doesn't look at your religion or your beliefs, they look at your eligibility. And if you if you are eligible to stay, then they will give you either nationality or some kind of documentation which will enable you to stay. That is because they've got rules and they've got a system which is in place to allow people to enter or be rejected. The Shaykh saying in response to this is that the Muslim, it is part of his aqeedah to understand how he then should interact with those people who has given him that protection. As for them, they are looking at just a secular way, just what the dunya, what they have established in the world for themselves, the rules that they have set for themselves. However, for us, yes, we look at the rules because we need to abide by them, but for the Muslim, it is part of his aqeedah to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over him and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him.
أضرب لكم مثالا. أحد الإخوة حصل على أموال من الحكومة بالخطأ، واتصل بدائرة الضرائب وقال لهم أنا منذ أكثر من سنة ونصف أخذت منكم أو وصلني منكم أموال كذا وكذا، وأريد أرجعها لكم لأني أخذتها بغير حق. فقالوا نبحث في الموضوع. فلما بحثوا قالوا لا، هذه أشياء قديمة وأنت الآن غير مطالب بها، فلم يطالبوه بهذه الأموال. فالمهم هنا أن هذا الشخص برأ ذمته أمام الله سبحانه وتعالى، مع أن القانون لم يطالبه بشيء.
Sorry, the Shaykh says, he gave us an example now of a brother. He said a brother, this actually happened. He got paid extra money, I'm guessing from Inland Revenue, because he got paid extra money from the government and it was done out of error. So he said, I've had this money and it doesn't belong to me because they've returned this money to me and it doesn't belong to me. It's not my right. So he contacted the relevant department and they've said, we will look into the issue. And after looking into the issue, they've said that this is a very, very old, this payment was done a very, very long time ago, over 1.5 years ago. So now you can keep it. We've got nothing to do with it. So the Shaykh saying that this is an example for the Muslim, that he himself has to free himself from any kind of, he's following the rules, but also he's freeing himself from any kind of consequence in front of Allah. That's why he contacted them.
ولهذا فالفقهاء قالوا إن هذا العقد الأمان يكون ملزما لك بغض النظر عن المقابل. فمن صور ذلك طبعا أقوى صور اللفظ الصريح، أن يقول أنني أنت في أماني، أو آمنتك، أو أمنتك، أو أنتم آمنون، يعني هذا اللفظ الصريح. أو مثلا يكون بإشارة مفهمة، أن يقول تعال إلى هذه الجهة حتى تكون في أمان، أو يكون بوضع علامة وإشارة على فعل وتصرف، كما وضع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عندما قال ومن دخل دار أبي سفيان فهو آمن، أي من فعل هذا الفعل ودخل في دار أبي سفيان حصل على هذا الامتياز، حصل على عقد الأمان. فالأمان قد يكون باللفظ الصريح، أو قد يكون بالإشارة، أو قد يكون بالفعل والتصرف.
Certainly, the Shaykh saying, following on from that previous example, irrespective of what the opposing party believe or whatever systems they have in place, the Muslim is wajib upon him to follow the rules and do what is correct according to his religion. How is the protection established? What is the process? The Shaykh said that there are 3 ways of protection being established. Either, number 1, it could be an explicit protection that the person gives. So the government or the person might say, you are now under my protection, or you are now safe, or I will give you protection, or we have given you protection, something similar. That is the explicit way of protection being offered from one person to another. The Shaykh then says that the second type is the implicit one. For example, come here, do this or something, come here, and then you will have the protection. The third one is when you do an action, or there is a sign that if you are qualified to do that thing, then you will gain the protection. And the Shaykh says, an example of this is the Prophet ﷺ, when he liberated Makkah, he said, whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan, then he is protected. So this is an example of people entering into a particular place, doing a particular action, and if they do that action, then they will be qualified to have that protection.
وتعظيما لعقد الأمان وتقبيحا للغدر والخيانة، فإن الفقهاء قالوا أن هذا العقد سيكون ملزما للمسلم حتى في حالة الكذب، حتى في حالة الكذب، وضربوا لذلك مثلا عجيبا. نعم.
The Shaykh says now the importance of preserving this protection once it has been established, and the extreme dislike and the prohibition of being treacherous towards this agreement that a person has, that the ulama have given even strange examples and very strict examples of Muslims abiding by the protection that they have entered into, the covenant that they've entered into, even if the other party has lied and been treacherous.
وذلك أن الإمام السرخسي رحمه الله، وهو من أئمة الحنفية، من فقهاء الحنفية، ذكر أنه لو خرج جيش أو مجموعة من المقاتلين من الدولة المسلمة وذهبوا إلى دولة أخرى معادية، دولة حربية، يريدون القتال، يريدون الحرب، فلما وصلوا إلى الحدود وأرادوا أن يدخلوا الدولة الأخرى حرسوا الحدود من الدولة المعادية، رصدوهم وكشفوا أمرهم، وهؤلاء عددهم قليل، فخافوا إذا أن يعني يقاتلوهم أن يعني لا يقووا على قتالهم، لا يقوون على قتالهم لقلة عددهم. فماذا قالوا لهم؟ قالوا لهم نحن جئنا للتجارة، جئنا للتجارة. وفي الحقيقة هم إيش؟ هم جنود أرسلتهم دولة للحرب. قالوا جئنا للتجارة، فقالوا لهم إذا ادخلوا، أنتم تجار وادخلوا البلد. قال الإمام السرخسي فهذا الكذب يكون إنه حصلوا على الأمان بالكذب، فهذا الأمان ملزم لهم حتى يتركوا هذا البلد، لا يجوز لهم أن يغدروا أو يخونوا، لأنه كما أنهم صاروا آمنين منهم فيجب أيضا أن يكون المقابل أيضا آمنين منهم. فانظروا إلى هذه الصورة التي عظم فيها فقهاؤنا جانب الوفاء بالعهود والمواثيق.
The Shaykh is saying here now, like we said in the previous paragraph, where he's saying the importance of preserving it and the prohibition of being treacherous, even if one of the parties have lied, and that could be now, the Shaykh has given an example of the Muslim side, maybe even lying. So the Shaykh said now, there is a Shaykh whose name is Imam al-Sarakhsi, he's from the Hanafi madhab. He said in his book, giving an example, if an army leaves, Muslim army, to go fight another army, and even perhaps if they've been oppressive, and they are now leaving their city to go fight another army, and they are leaving with the intent of war. If, for example, they come to the border of that country that they are about to fight, they find that the country is well guarded, there's a fortress, and they are small in number. The Muslim army is small in number. And then they realize that we don't have enough to fight such a country. They're very powerful, they're very well defended. Is there a way that we can now enter into their fortress, into their country, by saying something, by tricking them? So if we, now the example that the Shaykh is giving from this Hanafi Imam, if we say to them that we have come here for trade, the purpose that this small group of people have come is for the sake of entering into your country so that we can trade with you, so we can leave. If the opposing group say enter, even if they are oppressive, they say enter, the Shaykh says that it becomes haram for a person to then transgress that, even though they have entered into it by lying, because they haven't entered into that country by any intention to trade. They've actually entered in there so that they can infiltrate and then fight them from within. The Shaykh said if a person has been given a covenant and a protection, even if he himself has lied, then that becomes binding upon the Muslim, and it becomes haram for him to be treacherous in that regard. So the Shaykh is saying, look how detailed and serious the fuqaha have taken this, that a person has to abide by the protection and the covenants that he has taken, even if he has done it by lying by himself.
وصح عن الخليفة الراشد عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه عدة آثار في تعظيم شأن الأمان. نذكر أثرا واحدا، وهو أنه أرشد جنوده وهم الذين يقاتلون الأعداء في ساحات الحرب. قال أيما رجل من المسلمين أشار إلى رجل من العدو، يعني لاحظ هنا نحن نتكلم عن رجل من العدو، ليس في أرض السلام والأمان، وإنما في ساحة الحرب. قال لئن نزلت لأقتلنك، فنزل وهو يرى أنه أمان فقد أمنه. ما معنى هذا الكلام؟ يعني مثلا في ساحة الحرب عند المواجهة يصلون إلى مكان، يذهب مجموعة من الجنود ويختبئون في زاوية خلف مجموعة من الأشجار، خلف يعني دار خربة، ويعرفون أنهم قد انهزموا. فهؤلاء المسلمون يؤشرون اخرجوا، يعني اخرجوا أي خلاص أنتم آمنون، سنأخذكم أسرى، لن نقتلكم، أنتم آمنون. فيخرجون إيش؟ يظنون أن هذا أمان. وكان المسلم أصلا هو إيش يقصد أخرج للمواجهة والقتال، لكن هو إيش فهم؟ أخرج أنت آمن. فيقول عمر بن الخطاب يقول فقد أمنهم، يكون هذا أمانا ملزما له ديانة، فلا يجوز أن يغدر بهم.
The Shaykh says here we have an example of Umar radiallahu anhu Khattab, that there are many actually authentic narrations from him in talking about this affair, but he says we are going to give one example. He said once he sent out an army to fight an oppressive army, and this is going to happen in the battlefield. So we have a Muslim army going to fight the enemy which is oppressive during the battlefield. And the Shaykh says, look, within this context, this is happening on the battlefield, not inside an area where we've got protection, or a country or a city. He's saying this is happening on the battlefield. Umar radiallahu anh said, if any Muslim sees an enemy and he says to the enemy, come down, surrender yourself, and he comes down, then he has given him a protection. He has then given him a protection. The Shaykh gives an example of this. Say, for example, the Muslim army has entered and they have pushed the opposing army into hiding. Maybe they're hiding behind trees, maybe they're hiding behind ruins, etc. The Muslim side are saying to them, come out, surrender yourselves. So if they come out and surrender themselves, and they understand, come out, surrender yourselves, and you will not be killed, you will be prisoners of war, etc. Then the Shaykh is saying here that understand the statement of Umar radiallahu anh is that if they have come out under that understanding, then they have come out with peace. So now the Muslim has said, come out and show yourself so that we can continue fighting you because you are hiding. If they come out and they have understood from you that they are to come out and they will be under peace under that them surrendering, then it doesn't become permissible for us then to fight them because they have come out with the wrong intention. The Shaykh is saying, look at that is within the battlefield.
ولهذا أجمع فقهاء عصرنا علماء العصر أجمعوا على أن كل الصور العصرية داخلة في معنى الأمان، سواء كان تأشيرة زيارة، تأشيرة إقامة دائمة، إقامة دراسة، إقامة وقتية، أو الحصول على الجنسية، أو اللجوء الإنساني أو السياسي. كل هذه الصور داخلة في الأمان الذي عرفه الفقهاء، وجاءت الشريعة في تشديد أمره وإلزام المسلم به.
The Shaykh saying contemporary times now, the ulama today, the fuqaha that are alive today, are in complete consensus. There is no disagreement, not even from one of those ulama who are on the level of being faqih, except that they have all agreed that the examples of the way we have protection and contracts and covenants with one another of security and peace, all of them are valid, and this is what the Sharia sees them as being valid forms of protection which we cannot transgress against. So the Shaykh gives examples of visas, tourism visas, being allowed to be resident in the country. He's not national, but he's resident. Maybe he's got a study visa, maybe he's got a temporary visa, maybe he's actually attained citizenship in that next country that he has applied for. Maybe a person comes to another country and he is a refugee or is an asylum. All of these are examples that the Shaykh is saying of the covenants and the protections that we have been talking about this far, that the Sharia says that we must abide by, and it becomes haram for us to transgress.
ويترتب على المسلم أمور كثيرة يجب أن يلتزم بها. سنذكر أمرين وإن اتسع الوقت نذكر أمرا ثالثا. فأول ما يجب عليه أن يفي بهذا العهد، فلا يغدر ولا يخون ولا يغش ولا يكذب.
So the Shaykh said now, as a result of what we have established so far, that the religion is telling us that once you've entered into protection, you must abide by it. What are some of the effects of it today? And the Shaykh said that we are going to discuss 2, perhaps 3, if time permits. And the first one, he said that the Muslim must abide by the protection and the covenants and the word that they have entered into. And that means he cannot prove to be treacherous, he cannot lie, he cannot deceive, he cannot trick the other party.
يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا أوفوا بالعقود. والعقود هي العهود التي بين الناس، العهود والمواثيق.
Allah says in the beginning of Surah Al-Ma'idah, O you who believe, fulfill your contracts. And the Shaykh saying here, contracts refer to any kind of covenant and promise that he has with another person.
والآيات والأحاديث في وجوب الوفاء بالعهود والمواثيق وتحريم الغدر والخيانة كثيرة، وهي عامة في معاملة المسلم للمسلم ولغير المسلم، فهذه كلها داخلة في هذا الباب.
So the Shaykh says, in actual fact, there are many ayat and hadith which talk about us fulfilling these covenants, and it becomes mandatory for us to do so, and the prohibition of being treacherous and deceiving. And the Shaykh says, very importantly, that this is general. It applies to our transactions and our protection and our covenants with Muslims as well as non-Muslims.
ثم هناك نصوص خاصة في الوفاء بغير المسلمين، وهذه النصوص في الشريعة الأصل فيها ليس في الكفار المسالمين، بل في الكفار الحربيين الأعداء المعتدين، فإن كانوا مسالمين فهي ألزم وأوجب.
So the Shaykh said that there are actually other texts from the Quran and the Sunnah which show specifically on how we should then interact and the protection that we give to those non-Muslims. There are actually ones, the one he gave before was a general one. Now he's going to give example of those which are specific to non-Muslims. And the Shaykh is saying in the Sharia we have 2 types of non-Muslims. Those who we have an agreement with, there is no hostility, we have a good relationship with them. The Shaykh is saying, and the second type are those who we have enmity with, and perhaps they are an opponent and there is no treaty. The Shaykh is saying that the specific texts which talk about protection with non-Muslims refer to those people who we have no treaty with, maybe have enmity and opposition with. As for those then who we have an understanding and no ill feeling with, then it applies to them even more, and it's even more appropriate that it applies to them.
ونذكر في هذا آية وحديثا. أما الآية ففي سورة التوبة يقول ربنا سبحانه وتعالى: إلا الذين عاهدتم من المشركين ثم لم ينقصوكم شيئا ولم يظاهروا عليكم أحدا فأتموا إليهم عهدهم إلى مدتهم إن الله يحب المتقين.
And the Shaykh gives an example, the Shaykh gives an example from Surah Tawbah where Allah says, except for those who you have a covenant with and they have not proved to be treacherous in that covenant and they have not oppressed anyone, any specific individual, then fulfill that covenant and protection and agreement that you have with them to the agreed period that you have entered with.
والله سبحانه وتعالى جعل هذا من صفات المتقين.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah has made it as a sign and a characteristics of those people who have taqwa.
وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أيما رجل أمن رجلا على دمه ثم قتله فأنا من القاتل بريء وإن كان المقتول كافرا.
The Shaykh says in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if a person gives protection and he says, I'm going to protect you, or he's under protection from one man or another, and the man, one of them, kills the other, then the Prophet ﷺ says that I am free from that person who has killed, even if the person who has been killed is a non-Muslim.
قال الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله تعالى: إذا دخل قوم من المسلمين بلاد الحرب بأمان. لاحظوا نحن نتكلم عن بلاد الحرب، لكن هؤلاء دخلوا بأمان، فالعدو منهم آمنون إلى أن يفارقوهم أو يبلغوا مدة أمانهم وليس لهم ظلمهم ولا خيانتهم.
That's fine. And the Shaykh is saying with the understanding of Imam Shafi, where he said that if a Muslim enters into a land which is an opposing land, an enemy land, and the Shaykh is saying here, this is very important, he's not entering into a non-Muslim country that he already has a treaty with. He's entering into a non-Muslim country who he has enmity and opposition with. If he enters into that country with a treaty and a covenant of protection, then that person must abide by that until the agreed period, or as they have already agreed. And it doesn't become permissible, even though the person has given him protection, he's entering into a protected land, is the enemy land, he must abide by that protection, and it is not permissible for him to act treacherous or deceive them in that manner.
وكلام العلماء في هذا كثير، لكن لضيق الوقت ننتقل إلى نقطة أخرى، فنتكلم عن اعتقاد المسلم بأن الكفار غير المسلمين يملكون أموالهم ملكا صحيحا، فلا يجوز أن يستولي على أموالهم إلا بوجه صحيح أذن به الشارع.
So the Shaykh said that about this particular point, where there are specific evidences which oblige us to follow with the protection that we have with non-Muslims. He said there are plenty of statements from the ulama. But now the Shaykh is saying we're going to move to the next stage of the topic, which is the aqeedah of the Muslim, the belief of the Muslim, is that the wealth of the disbelievers, the wealth of the non-Muslims, cannot be transgressed and it remains preserved for them.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala أضاف الأموال إلى المسلمين في سورة البقرة، قال الذين ينفقون أموالهم، وكذلك أضاف الأموال في سورة النساء إلى أصحابها من الكفار. أيضا إيش قال؟ قال والذين ينفقون أموالهم رئاء الناس ولا يؤمنون بالله وباليوم الآخر ولا باليوم الآخر. والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم علم من سنته وسيرته علما يقينيا أنه كان يعامل المشركين مع أنهم معتدون وحربيون وظالمون، يعاملهم على أساس أنهم يملكون أموالهم ملكا صحيحا، وأن مجرد كفرهم لا يحل أموالهم، بل يعاملهم على أساس البيع والشراء والقرض والحفظ الأمانات وغير ذلك.
The Shaykh said that there are ayat in the Quran which support this also. So Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, in affirming that wealth belongs to the believers, Allah says, and those people who spend from their wealth, referring to the believers. But there's another ayah in Surah An-Nisa where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the munafiqun, those people who are not Muslim internally. Allah ascribes that wealth belonging to them also, that those people who spend from their wealth only to be seen of men. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these two ayat has said that the wealth that belongs to the Muslim and the wealth that belongs to the non-Muslim belongs to them, and it is ascribed to them, and it becomes their property. And also from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, is well known that the Prophet ﷺ used to recognize the wealth that used to belong to the mushrikun, even though that they were oppressive against him, they were opponents, they were his enemy. The Prophet ﷺ never transgressed against the wealth that belonged to them. And the Shaykh is saying here a very important point, that kufr alone and disbelief alone is not it doesn't permit a person to take the wealth of another person just because he disbelieves or disbelieves in Islam or has a different religion. The rulings of us taking his wealth through business or trade, or mutually taking wealth through business and loans and etc., has to be also established in the correct manner in that way.
نذكر ثلاثة أمثلة من سيرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو الأسوة والقدوة. المثال الأول أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما أراد الهجرة إلى المدينة وكان الأمر مفاجئا وعاجلا، فكان للمشركين أمانات عنده صلى الله عليه وسلم. يعني انظر أنهم يخالفونه في الدين ويعادونه، لكن مع ذلك يعرفون أنه هو الصادق الأمين، فيضعون عنده الأمانات. لأن في ذاك الوقت ما في بنك ولا في أي جهة رسمية تحفظ فيها الأمانات، يضعون الأمانات عند رجل أمين. فالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في عجلة من أمره لا يستطيع أن يرد الأمانات، فأمر علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه أن يمكث في مكة حتى يرد أمانات الناس إلى أصحابها، ويتخلف عن الهجرة. فبقي علي أياما إلى أن رد الأمانات فلحق بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Salih. The Shaykh said that he's going to give 3 examples from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ to emphasize this point. So when the Prophet ﷺ wanted to make hijrah from Mecca to Al-Madinah, the command to make hijrah came all of a sudden. So it had to be done in haste. But at that time, the Prophet ﷺ had transactions and wealth and possessions that used to belong to other people. Because the Shaykh is saying here, they didn't have banks and a neutral area where you can leave the wealth of somebody else. He would have possessions that belong to other people, because at that time, if you had some wealth, you'd leave it with somebody who was trustworthy. And they knew that the Prophet ﷺ was trustworthy. And the Shaykh is saying here, look, even though that they had a different religion, he was still somebody who was ameen and trustworthy. And they knew that if they left their wealth with him, he would then, look after it properly and return it in the correct manner. So even though the Prophet ﷺ was engaged with the hijrah and it happened all of a sudden, he didn't leave the wealth behind without there being any kind of instruction. He actually then gave Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh the command to then fulfill the things and the possessions that he had of those non-Muslims so that he can then make hijrah. Ali's hijrah himself was delayed for this very point, and then once everything had been paid out and returned, then Ali made hijrah.
فتأملوا في هذه القصة كيف أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لم يستحل أموالهم ولم يحتقر شأن هذا الأمر، هذه الأمانات، مع شدة ما وقع عليه من ظلمهم وبغيهم. ما قال أن هؤلاء مشركون وحقوقهم ساقطة وليس لهم أي كرامة. لا، النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عاملهم بأخلاقه لا بأخلاقهم هم، وبدينه لا بدينهم هم. وهكذا يجب على المسلم أن يتعامل على أساس دينه وأخلاقه، لا على أساس النظر للآخرين.
The Shaykh makes a very important point here. Say here, look, the Prophet ﷺ didn't permit the wealth of other people, even though they were his enemies and they were oppressing him. He didn't once say that they have no rights because they've oppressed me, so I'm going to oppress them back, or they have no rights, or they have no honor. The Prophet ﷺ dealt with them and he interacted with them with the correct manners and the correct etiquettes and what the religion, our religion, tells us. Not the way that they behave towards him. He behaved the way that this religion tells us to behave with them. So the Shaykh is saying here that this is a very important point.
نعم. بارك الله فيك. المثال الثاني في صحيح البخاري وصحيح مسلم قصة عظيمة رواها عبد الرحمن بن أبي بكر الصديق رضي الله تعالى عنهما. قال: كنا مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم 30 و100، يعني من الرجال المقاتلين الأشداء من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. ثم جاء رجل مشرك بغنم يسوقها، فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أبيعا أم عطية؟ أو قال هبة؟ فقال: لا، بل بيع. فاشترى منه شاة. No.
So the Shaykh said there is an incident that's been recorded in Bukhari and Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ went out with an army of 130 men, and they came across a mushrik man who was a shepherd and he had his goats. So he approached, they met one another, and the Prophet ﷺ wanted to take some of his sheep. So he asks, are you giving this as a matter of trade? Am I going to trade this with you? Or is it a gift? So the shepherd himself then said, that no, this is a transaction and it is not a gift.
فتأملوا في هذه القصة يا إخواني. أولا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان في حال القوة، معه 130 من أصحابه، وهذا المشرك لوحده، هذا أولا. ثانيا هذا مشرك وجميع المشركين كانوا في حالة حرب مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، كما يقول ابن حزم رحمه الله تعالى: كل الجزيرة العربية كانت دار شرك وحرب إلا المدينة، يعني فقط المدينة في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. خارج ذلك الناس كلهم يحاربون النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، إلا قبائل محدودة، إلا في أشياء محدودة، في بعض الصلح، في بعض التفاهمات، لكن العموم كلها دار شرك وحرب. والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يلتقي بمشرك في مكان خارجي. المفترض أنت عقليا لو تفسر أنه يأخذه ويقتله ويأخذ الغنم هذا كله غنيمة، هذا هو التفسير العقلي اللي نحن فاهمينه. لكن انظر إلى فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، اعتبر المال ملكا صحيحا له، وقال: تريد تبيع ولا تهدينا هدية؟ قال: لا أبيع. وسبحان الله، شوف لي وحده ما خاف، قال: بيع. فاشترى منه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. طبعا القصة طويلة في صحيح البخاري. كان الصحابة في حالة جوع شديد وفي حاجة إلى الطعام، فاشترى شاة واحدة ل130، فجعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقسم، وجعل الله سبحانه وتعالى في قسمته البركة، فأكل الجميع وشبعوا من شاة واحدة. وهذا من معجزات النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في تكثيره الطعام.
The Shaykh saying, look at this incident. 130 people have gone out, Muslim army, and they've met one shepherd with a flock of sheep. And from this incident we can learn many different benefits. The first thing the Shaykh is saying here, that the Prophet ﷺ was in a position of strength, and the shepherd was alone, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't transgress. That's the first thing. The second thing, he was a mushrik. And all of the mushriks at that time, like Ibn Hazm rahimahullah said, all of Medina, all of the peninsula except Medina at that time, all of the peninsula except Medina at that time were enemies to the Prophet ﷺ. They were all mushriks, they were all considered as being the enemy and the opponent, except for a few villages that had given the Prophet ﷺ a treaty and allegiance. So now this man, he comes, and rationally you would think that it would be permissible for a Muslim to kill that person because he belongs to a city that doesn't have any treaty with the Prophet ﷺ, and they are enemies towards the Prophet ﷺ. Rationally he would then kill him and take all of his wealth, and then consider that as being war booty. But the Shaykh is saying, look here, the wealth was preserved, and the Prophet ﷺ saw it as that wealth belonging to that man, and it wasn't a right that he can take from him. So he asks him, can I trade with you, or will you give us a gift? And the person said, no, I want to trade with you. And the third point that the Shaykh also alluded to here is that one man, not for one instant did he feel scared. He would have been scared, he would have said, no, take it. But he said, no, I want to trade with you. So now 130 Muslims against this one shepherd. The Prophet ﷺ is in a state of strength. All of the mushriks at that time were seen as the enemy, and that shepherd himself, the person who's come from that enemy land, didn't perceive any kind of a threat. The Shaykh said this is a very long story, but the context of the story is that those 130 that was with the Prophet ﷺ, they were starving. They had left out of Medina and they didn't have any food, and they were very, very hungry. So the Prophet ﷺ bought from this one man one sheep. One sheep for 130 people is not enough. But the Prophet ﷺ split the sheep up, they slaughtered it, they cooked it, and they split the sheep up. And from the barakah of the Prophet ﷺ, Allah gave the Prophet ﷺ a miracle that 130 people ate from that one sheep, and all of them ate to their fill.
طيب أنا من باب فقط الاستطراد أقول لكم يا إخواني، يعني انظروا هذا الحديث في الصحيحين، ونحن جميعا نحتاج إلى معرفة مثل هذه الأمثلة من سيرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وسنته، لأن في هذا يعني محاسن أخلاقه ودعوته صلى الله عليه وسلم. فكم منكم في هذا المجلس سمع هذا الحديث قبل هذا الوقت؟ يعني من منكم سمع هذا الحديث قبل هذا المجلس؟
The Shaykh is asking, how many of you have heard this incident before this lecture?
لا أحد، مع أن الحديث إيش؟ في الصحيحين. هذا يبين لنا إخواني أهمية إبراز هذه الأحكام حتى نعرف سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعرف أخلاقه ونعرف محاسن ديننا. وكثير من الشباب الذين ذهبوا في طريق التطرف والإرهاب وضيعوا أنفسهم في هذا الطريق، ذلك بسبب جهلهم بمفصل ما جاء به النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. يعني نعم عرفوا الإسلام، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله، آمنت بالله، خلاص. ما هي الأحكام المفصلة؟ هو في غيبة عنها. فيأتي أي شخص يدعوه إلى التطرف، إلى الإرهاب، إلى أن يفجر نفسه، إلى أن يقتل الأبرياء، حتى وصل الحال إلى التفجير في الأماكن العامة في المحطات، بل حتى التفجير في المساجد. هذا إيش سببه؟ أن هذا الإنسان مغيب لا يعرف حقيقة هذا الدين. وإلا كيف هذا الحديث في الصحيحين؟ وأنا في عدة مرات عملت محاضرات ودورات أسأل الإخوة في المسجد وهم من الملازمين للمسجد، هل سمعتم هذا الحديث؟ يقول ما سمعنا هذا الحديث أبدا، أول مرة نسمع هذا الحديث. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم معه 130 يعامل مشرك هذه المعاملة، وأنتم تشوفون في مقاطع الفيديو يدخلون على الناس فيذبحونهم ويأخذون أموالهم غنائم ويدمرون ويقتلون. هذا كله باسم إيش؟ باسم الإسلام وباسم الله أكبر والجهاد. يعني لا تركوا لا أخلاق ولا قيم، وصوروا الإسلام بأنه إيش؟ توحش وهمجية وقتل وذبح، ما في أي أخلاق. والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم معه 130 رجل، ويسأل المشرك يقول له تبيع ولا تهدي؟ المشرك يقول له لا أبيع ما أقتل. يقول له طيب أشتري منك، مع أنه يستطيع أن يقطع رأسه ويقطع رؤوس كل الغنم اللي عنده صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So the Shaykh is saying, just to summarize, that this hadith is agreed upon, and there are many examples in this hadith and outside of this hadith also that we need to know, and in them we can see the akhlaq and the manners of the believer and how the Prophet ﷺ taught us. The Shaykh is saying, how many of us have heard this hadith before? We asked this question, and not a lot of people have heard of these hadith. And the Shaykh is saying this is showing us that it's very important for us to understand a hadith like these and study them and look at the examples within them, because now the youth, they're being led towards extremism and hatred and you know the right wing kind of understanding. And all of that is based on ignorance, because they have a general understanding of Islam, what Islam generally is, but they don't have the details, because this hadith is a hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Nobody's really heard of this hadith here, us, but for them, they don't have the details. And as a result of that, when we are ignorant, as a result of that, anybody can just come to us and then confuse us when we don't have knowledge. People will come to you and they will tell you to become extreme, they will tell you to commit suicide and do suicide bombings, and they will tell you to go kill people and transgress against people, and they will do this in their stations and in the cafes, and now they're even doing it in the masajid. What is the cause of all of this? The Shaykh is saying here, the root cause of it is that he doesn't know his religion. And the Shaykh is saying we have offered lectures like this in many different locations, we have had conferences in many different locations, and every time we go to a different place, not many people have heard this hadith. 130 with the Prophet ﷺ against one non-Muslim mushrik. So the Shaykh is saying here now what's happened is with the youth, they have got an understanding of Islam which is just to kill and just to take people's wealth and just to proclaim Islam in a manner which is wild, and there is harshness in it. And when they have that understanding of Islam, there's no akhlaq left, there is no beauty of Islam left. All they want to show is Islam as being a wild religion and a harsh and a violent religion, and they show takbir on their videos, and they show what they call jihad, etc. The Prophet ﷺ in this hadith, 130 against 1, he asked the shepherd. He didn't just take it. He asked him, can you give this to us, or are you going to trade it to us? And the shepherd, with all confidence, not scared, said, no, I'm not going to give you anything. You can buy it from me if you want. The Prophet ﷺ could have killed him, could have taken his head off, could have taken his wealth. But this is showing us the beauty of this religion and the akhlaq of this religion. But all of it boils down to us having a relationship with knowledge.
طيب بسبب ضيق الوقت أختم بهذا المثال الأخير وهو الثالث. والقصة أيضا في صحيح الإمام البخاري، قصة المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله تعالى عنه. مغيرة بن شعبة كان مشركا وصحب قوما من المشركين، خرج معهم في سفر، كان في صحبتهم، يعني كانوا في صحبة أي كانوا في أمان مع أنهم مشركون. فالمغيرة بن شعبة غدر بهم فقتلهم وأخذ أموالهم ثم هرب فجاء إلى المدينة، جاء إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأعلن إسلامه. فماذا قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم له؟ نعم.
So the Shaykh is saying here now, the third example and the last one is a hadith that's been recorded in Bukhari, that Mughira bin Shu'bah, who was a mushrik at that time, he left with his companions and his friends on a journey. And if you understand that, if you go with your friends anywhere, you think that you are safe with one another, you are protected one another, there is no need for you to fear one another. When they went out, he killed all the other mushriks that were there with him. He took their wealth and he went to Al-Madinah. When he got to Al-Madinah, he proclaimed his Islam after killing them and taking their wealth. What did the Prophet ﷺ do?
النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال له: أما الإسلام فأقبل وأما المال فلست منه في شيء. نعم.
The Prophet ﷺ said, as for your Islam, then we will accept that Islam. However, your wealth that you have taken by killing these people and unjustly taking it and robbing them, then we have got nothing to do with it.
هذا في صحيح البخاري. وفي سنن أبي داود قال: وأما المال فمال غدر لا حاجة لنا إليه.
This is the version of Bukhari. There is another version in Abu Dawud which has an extra wording where the Prophet ﷺ said, as for this wealth which has been taken treacherously, this is how the Prophet ﷺ described it, then we have got no need for it.
فالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل الإسلام، لكن هذا المال مع أنه حصل قبل إسلامه وحصل خارج مسؤولية الدولة المسلمة، خارج مسؤولية النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، ومع ذلك قال هذا مال غدر. لماذا؟ لأن مجرد الصحبة لما تصحب ناس فهذا صورة من صور الأمان، يجب أن تفي به. يعني لا أنت فقط لما تذهب إلى أي مكان تركب التاكسي، سائق التاكسي لابد أن يكون في أمان منك وأنت تكون في أمان منك، لا تقدر ولا يقدر بك. هذا هو الواجب في العلاقات الإنسانية. فحتى وهم في حال الإشواك النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يلزمه بهذا الأمر ويقول: لا، ولو كنت مشركا، لكن هذا غدر ونحن لا نقبل مالا أخذ بالغدر، لم يأخذه.
So the Shaykh is saying here that he accepted his Islam, but he didn't accept his wealth. He didn't recognize that wealth belonging to him. This is despite the fact that he took that person's wealth and the group of people's wealth before he became Muslim. And he took those people's wealth even though he was outside of Al-Madinah. Now when we understand that when a person becomes Muslim, his past sins are forgiven, when he's entered into Medina he's got protection with the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't recognize that wealth belonging to him, because he then described it as being a wealth which is treacherous. Why? The Shaykh is saying here is that because whenever you enter into a protection, then it becomes wajib and mandatory for us to fulfill that protection. And an example of having protection is when you are accompanying someone. The Shaykh gives an example. If a person sits inside of a taxi, the taxi driver must protect the client, and the client must protect the taxi driver, as in they cannot transgress one another. They can't prove treacherous to one another. That is how we live in humanity now as well. It's a basic human right. The Shaykh is saying here, though, in Islam, even though the person had shirk, the Prophet ﷺ didn't accept that level of transgression.
ثم أختم بنموذج من جميل أخلاق وشمائل نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Shaykh is saying here, we'll conclude the lecture with giving some examples of the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ and his noble character.
نحن ذكرنا أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لما رجع من الطائف دخل في جوار أحد المشركين من مكة، أحد سادتهم. من كان؟ من يذكر؟ المطعم بن عدي. نعم، المطعم بن عدي. المطعم بن عدي أحسن إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في هذا الموقف، والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بعد ذلك هاجر إلى المدينة، والمطعم بن عدي مات مشركا. فلما كان يوم بدر وانتصر المسلمون في يوم الفرقان وجاءوا بالأسرى مقيدين إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نظر إلى هذا المنظر. الآن هو في حال القوة والعزة والنصر، وهؤلاء رؤوس المشركين جاءوا أذلاء. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تذكر تلك الصورة عندما كان مستضعفا في مكة تلك السنوات الطويلة، لكن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يعرف الثأر والاستكبار، بل يغلب عليه التواضع ورقة القلب. فتذكر في هذا الموقف، تذكر ذلك الموقف من المطعم بن عدي عندما أمنه وهو راجع من الطائف. فماذا قال صلى الله عليه وسلم؟ قال: لو كان المطعم بن عدي حيا وكلمني في هؤلاء النتنى، هؤلاء الأسرى، لأطلقتهم له صلى الله وسلم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه، والحمد لله رب العالمين.
So the Shaykh ends with one example of the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ and his noble characteristics. After Ta'if, when he left Makkah, he had no protection. When he returned from Ta'if seeking protection, Al-Mut'im ibn Adi gave him protection. And Al-Mut'im was kind to him. And the Prophet ﷺ accepted that protection until he made the hijrah. After he made the hijrah, Mut'im ibn Adi ended up dying, and he died as a mushrik. A couple of years later, in the Battle of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ had now a position of strength over the previous enemy. The Quraysh were very strong before, but now they have become weak as a result of that battle. They were subdued because of that battle. The Prophet ﷺ, after a long time, and this is now the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, even though it's been such a long time, he didn't forget Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. And the Shaykh said that is because the Prophet ﷺ didn't understand what pride was. He didn't understand what revenge and being haughty was. The Prophet ﷺ was soft in his heart, and he remembered the favors that people gave to him. So now, on the day of Badr, they've got a lot of prisoners of war. They've captured a lot of people. What do they do with them? This became an actual agreement between, an actual conversation between the companions. What do we do with these people? Do we kill them? Do we get ransom for them? Do we imprison them? What do we do? So the Prophet ﷺ, amongst the midst of hearing what people were saying, he said, if Mut'im ibn Adi was alive today, and he said, free them, because he was from the heads of Quraysh himself. If he said, free them, I would have listened to him and I would have freed them all. Why? In showing the kindness and repaying the kindness that Al-Mut'im ibn Adi showed to the Prophet ﷺ, in remembering the favors that Al-Mut'im ibn Adi gave to the Prophet ﷺ, and not showing any kind of pride towards Al-Mut'im ibn Adi. And this is now the Shaykh is showing us the example of the beauty and the lofty status of the Prophet ﷺ, even when he was dealing with those people who he had no protection with.
نقطة أخيرة ولو أنا عودت في الختام، لكن ما ذكرناه هذه أمثلة من الكتاب، كتاب الدخول في أمان غير المسلمين. الكتاب موجود باللغة الإنجليزية وموجود PDF. إن شاء الله من أحب منكم أن يقرأ الكتاب فيسأل الشيخ عارف وإن شاء الله يوفر لكم الكتاب. في نسخ مطبوعة لكن أظن قليلة، لكن PDF يكون متاح للجميع إن شاء الله. الله يجزاكم خير وبارك الله فيكم.
الله يجزاكم خير شيخ.
ومسامحونا طلنا عليكم. جزاكم الله خير.
بارك الله فيك.
وبارك الله فيكم. ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن ينفعنا بما سمعنا ويرزقنا العلم النافع والعمل الصالح ويثبتنا على التوحيد والسنة، إنه ولي ذلك والقادر عليه، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
So the Shaykh wanted just to make a point that the book that the Shaykh was reading from is an extensive research, what we said before. It's available, it's been printed in English and it's also been translated. It's been printed in Arabic, but it's also been translated into English. However, it's not widely available because it hasn't been printed in large volumes, but there is a PDF that is available. So the Shaykh is saying if anybody wants to read it in English, then we can make it available for them. And the Shaykh ended up by making dua that Allah preserves us and gives us assistance. هذا والله أعلم وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أسئلة يا شيخ؟ Anybody got any questions?
جزاك الله خير شيخ. المحاضرة كانت قيمة في موضوعها. في لكن كانت تثار بعض الشبه حول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، وهو أنه قصد عير قريش في بدر، فأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ما كان خارجا لقصد المعركة، لكن قصد العير التي فيها أموال قريش وكان بقيادة أبي سفيان. فنبي توضيح حول هذه الشبهة.
أي نعم. يعني هذه سوء. أي نعم.
Okay, so we have a question where a person is saying that the Prophet ﷺ went out to Badr and he had the people under his captivity, etc. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't go out there for the sake of war. It was actually just to intercept the caravan. So how do we understand this point?
طيب الجواب على هذا من عدة وجوه. الوجه الأول أن المسلمين لما هاجروا إلى المدينة صوبت أموالهم في مكة ومنعوا من حمل أموالهم معهم، وكثير منهم طلعوا خلسة، فهذه الأموال كانت في غالبها من الأموال التي أخذت منهم ظلما. هذا الوجه الأول من الجواب.
So the Shaykh is answering this doubt because the doubt is revolving around the Prophet ﷺ going to intercept the caravan and taking the wealth from non-Muslims, and there is no war. He just wants to steal their wealth. This is the idea that people come out with as a misconception. So the Shaykh is saying, in answering this, we have two answers. Number one, the people who made hijrah from Mecca to Al-Madinah, they were oppressed and they had their wealth taken from them, and they were forced to leave Mecca without anything. So they were then going to intercept that caravan so that they can gain some of their wealth back.
الوجه الثاني إنه الآن يجب أن ننظر أن هذا التصرف لم يكن تصرفا شخصيا، وإنما كان تصرف بين دولتين، دولة في مكة ويمثلها هنا أبو سفيان الذي هو بمثابة وزير التجارة، والدولة الأخرى هي دولة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في المدينة، والعلاقة بين الدولتين كانت علاقة حرب. كانت علاقة حرب، ليس بينهم أي صلح ولا سلم. وفي هذه الحالة الطرفين يحق لهم أن يباشروا بمصادرة أموال الطرف الآخر بالهجوم عليهم، لأنه ما في شيء يمنعهم من ذلك، العلاقة قائمة على الحرب. نعم.
And the Shaykh is saying from a second viewpoint is that some people will look at this as individuals fighting individuals, but it's not. It's two countries fighting one another. So there is an attack from Al-Madinah on attack on Mecca, even though it's not from one country to another. Abu Sufyan, who's the one who's transporting that caravan to Mecca, he takes the role as being a representative, as a finance minister or something like that, and he is the one that is bringing the wealth over back to Mecca. So now, because Mecca and Medina have no treaties with them, they have no agreement, there is no protection, there is no covenant, the understanding that Mecca and Medina had at that time with one another is an understanding of being opponents and enemies and war. And when you have that situation, then it is about who is going to attack first, and fighting is definitely on the cards because there is no agreement.
يعني هنا أريد التأكيد على إيش؟ إنه هذه تصرف دولة مقابل دولة وليس تصرفا فرديا. وفي الكتاب في التفصيل موجود جواب على هذه المسألة، يعني بمعنى ليس ما يحق للجماعة للدولة يحق للفرد، لأن الفرد لا يتصرف تصرف الدولة، يتصرف في إطار مسؤوليته هو. فلو افترضنا أنه يعني في هذه الصورة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أعلن الحرب عليهم ويريد أن يأخذ أموالهم، لو خرج فرد واحد من المسلمين لا يحق له أن يفعل إلا أن يكون النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم هو الذي أمره وأرسله. أما أن يتصرف من عنده ومع أنه يحق له ذلك من جهة أنه هو مظلوم، لكن لا يجوز له أن يتصرف لأنه فرد وليس دولة أو جهة رسمية. نعم.
The Shaykh makes a very good point in explaining this further. He's saying here, this example of Badr is a country against a country and not an individual against an individual. And the two cannot be confused with one another. So say, for example, we've got one country that is in enmity and they have no contract and no protection with one another, with another country. If an individual leaves one of those countries and he goes to an area and he takes the wealth belonging to another country, he does that personally for himself, that is not permissible because he has confused an individual right with a country right. And it doesn't become permissible for him to take that. Unless if the Prophet ﷺ had commanded him, and now he's being a representative of that country, he has left and he has gone on behalf of that country, then it becomes permissible. So the Shaykh is making a very important point in understanding here that it is a country, Al-Madinah, which was fighting another country, which was Mecca, and Abu Sufyan was an example as a representative of that country, and it is not individuals taking the wealth of other individuals.
Yeah. طيب عندكم سؤال في داخل الموضوع في إطار الموضوع؟
Any other questions?
إن شاء الله.
Say if a Muslim was under protection of non-Muslims and part of the agreement was that they have to relinquish being a Muslim or they're not allowed to practice Islam in public, then what do we do in this case?
لو فرض أن المسلم دخل في أمن غير المسلم وغير المسلمين يعني شرطوا عليهم أن يترك دينه أو يترك بعض واجباته، هل هذا الأمان يعني مستقيم؟ هل هذا الأمان يعني قائم بهذه الشروط؟
لا، هو هنا الأمان قائم، لكن يبقى بالنسبة له يعني لا يجوز أن يقيم في مكان يمنع من إظهار دينه. ما معنى إظهار الدين؟ أن يقيم أركان الإسلام في نفسه. يعني أنا يقول لي أنت تجلس هنا وعندك الحق، حق الإقامة، وتجلس في أمان، لكن أمنعك من الذهاب إلى المسجد. أنت هنا لا تستطيع أن تشترط عليه شيء، خلاص قل له أنا لن أجلس في هذا المكان، لا أختار هذا الجوار، هذا الأمان، سأذهب إلى مكان آخر حتى أستطيع أن أصلي فيه. فهذا لا ينقض العهد، ولكن يجب على المسلم أن يخرج من هذا الوضع إذا عجز عن إقامة أركان دينه.
So the questioner, to reiterate, he was asking, what if a person takes a treaty and a covenant or a visa or nationality with a country, and they have said, well, we'll give you protection on the condition that you have to sacrifice some aspects of your religion which are wajib upon you, or even possibly pillars of your religion. Does that protection, is that valid Islamically? Is that something which is recognized? And the Shaykh said, yes, it is recognized. It is a recognized protection. However, for the Muslim, it is not permissible for him to stay there because he is not able to fulfill the aspects of his religion which are wajib upon him. Therefore, then he needs to leave that place and move to another place where they will give him protection and allow him to stay in that location so that he can practice his religion. The Shaykh gives an example here. Say, for example, this country or our country says, you can stay in our country, but you are not allowed to stay in this masjid. That becomes binding upon us now. So now we are not allowed to have this masjid because we have entered that protection. So either we apply to have a masjid somewhere else or a center somewhere else, and if they are stopping us from establishing our wajibat and things that are mandatory upon us and the pillars of our religion, then we must seek somewhere else.
طبعا الشيخ عبد الرحمن السعدي صاحب التفسير رحمه الله ذكر قال إظهار الدين ليس مقصود منه تطبيق أحكام الشريعة، فإن أحكام الشريعة لا تطبق في ديار الكفار، وإنما إظهار الدين أنه يسمح له بإقامة أركان الإسلام، وأن يأمن على نفسه أن يقول أني مسلم، يعني أنا مسلم وأصلي وأذهب إلى صلاة الجمعة والجماعة وأصلي العيد وأصوم رمضان، لا يخاف من هذا الأمر، فإن تم هذا القدر فقد أقام دينه. ثم بعد ذلك لا شك يقع هناك ظلم ويقع هناك تقصير، يعني ممكن الأخ يشير إلى قضية منع الحجاب في بعض الدول وكذا، فهذه لا تنقض العهد، لكن يجب على المسلم أن يخفف الظلم على نفسه بقدر ما يستطيع.
The Shaykh points out here that Imam al-Sa'di in his tafsir, rahimahullah, he makes a very important point in that it doesn't become a condition that a person makes apparent his religion. That is not a condition for a person to stay in the protection of a non-Muslim. What is understood is that a person must be able to establish the ahkam of his religion, the things which are wajib upon him, even if there are no apparent symbols. So as long as a person can say, I am a Muslim, I am free to be a Muslim in your country, I can pray, I can fast, that is sufficient for him to stay under the protection of that non-Muslim protection. He doesn't need to make and seek it to make it even more apparent in society, as long as he can say, I'm a Muslim, and do the things which are wajib upon him. However, the Shaykh is saying here, in that situation where they are stopping Islam from being apparent, it is likely then that some kind of oppression and some kind of undercutting the rights of a group of people, the minorities, will bound to occur. And the Shaykh is saying perhaps the brother was asking this because, for example, in France, they have prevented people from wearing the veil. That protection for the Muslims in France is still binding, and they still need to uphold that, and it doesn't negate the fact that they still have a protection with the French government. However, now they are being oppressed because they can't display or do the things which is wajib upon them. In that scenario, the person must then seek to lessen the oppression by perhaps seeking somewhere else to go.
طيب إن شاء الله.
بارك الله فيك، جزاك الله خير، بارك الله فيك، الله يحفظك، جزاك الله خير. سبحان الله.